Hello and welcome to the demo on using the parallel activity in UiPath Studio. In this demo, we'll learn how to use parallel activity in our workflows and in particular the condition property of parallel activity. What happens when the condition is true and when the condition is false. So, how does the parallel activity perform its execution? The parallel activity executes all child activities simultaneously and asynchronously. By asynchronous, we mean that the activities are totally independent of each other. Great, let's explore this. We encourage you to build along with this video. You'll find the input files needed in the lesson after the video. Let's see how we can use the parallel activity to calculate the tax based on the amount entered by the user. The parallel property condition is set to user input less than 3,000. If the user enters a value less than 3,000, then the user needn't pay the tax. If the user enters a value greater than or equal to 3,000, then tax calculation is done at 8%. It then logs and displays the values before and after tax calculation as per the user entry. Alright, are you ready? Let's create a new sequence and name it Sequence to calculate tax using parallel activity. Let's add the annotation to the sequence. Next, let's add a parallel activity and give it a descriptive name. The parallel activity is like a container with sequences, and these sequences are executed based on conditions. The execution approach, although may not be fully simultaneous, yet executes from top to bottom and left to right, asynchronously. So this means each successive activity only executes when the previously scheduled activity completes or goes idle. If none of the child activities of this activity go idle, this activity executes in the same way that a sequence activity does, and of course, based on a condition. To set the condition, we must first create a variable. So let's do that. We'll create a variable and name it user input. This variable is of type double. Let's now click on the properties and enter the condition for parallel activity. User input less than 3,000. Within the parallel container, we need two sequences. The first sequence executes when the condition is true, and that's when the user enters a value less than 3,000 and logs a message for the same. And the second branch executes when the condition is false. This sequence executes after the first branch, and it also calculates 8% tax on the value entered. Let's create the first sequence and add the annotation. Now we want the user to enter the amount, so let's add the input dialog box to prompt the user to enter the values. Let's add the dialog title as Tax Calculator and enter the input label as Please enter amount to calculate tax, plus VBCRLF, plus, and 8% will be deducted for values over 3,000. VBCRLF stands for Visual Basic Carriage Return Line Feed. This represents a carriage return character combined with a line feed character for print and display functions. It's like pressing Enter. Finally, in the Value Entered section, let's enter the variable where we want to store the user entry. Great, we're done with the first sequence. Let's build our second one. We'll add a second sequence activity in the same parallel activity container to the right-hand side of the first sequence. We can have multiple sequences depending on the scenario, but it's important to note that the first sequence from left to right executes first, and the rest follows depending on the condition that we set. The second sequence calculates the tax value and assigns it to a new variable. It also logs the value afterwards using the log message activity, then assigns true to the Boolean variable newly created after tax calculation. This Boolean variable is further used to check if tax is applied, and if it is, then displays the amount after tax deduction. We'll see this shortly. Before we display the after-tax calculation messages, we must store the value of the user input after 8% tax is calculated on it. To do that, let's add an assign activity and create a new variable in the variable panel and name it user input after tax. It's of the type double. In the value field, let's add the formula to calculate tax. Next, let's log the values after tax calculation. We'll add the log message activity and the message. We want to check if the tax is applied, and if it is, then display the amount after tax deduction. We want this at the end of the workflow, outside the parallel container. But how do we do this? Remember the Boolean variable to check if tax is applied? Cool! Let's first create the new Boolean variable, tax applied, in the variable panel. Note that the default value of this variable is false. We'll set the scope of the variables to the outermost sequence so that we have better visibility. Let's add an assign activity and use the tax applied variable in the to field. Assign it with a value true. Alright, we've built our second sequence. To check if tax is applied, we'll use the if statement with condition. Let's enter the condition tax applied equals true. If the condition is true, then let's log it and display a message. After taxes, you're left with using the log message and message box activity. The variable that holds this value is user input after tax. Else, if the condition is false, let's log it to and display a message, you're below 3,000 and need not pay taxes. Let's run the workflow. Try a few values less than and greater than 3,000. And it works. Let's check the same in the output panel as well. Great! In this demo, we've learned to build a workflow using the parallel activity that executes two sequences based on the condition of parallel property. If the condition is true, then it executes the first sequence with user input less than 3,000. If the condition is false, then it executes the second sequence, but only after the first sequence. The parallel activity is executed from top to bottom, left to right, asynchronously. For more practice on this topic, try to invoke workflows using the parallel activity and explore if you can make a robot do multiple things at the same time. That was all for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.